So in college, did you ever imagine that you'd be doing most of your work in a box?
Well, no. The technology was just transitioning over to, like, at the time, Giga Studio and sample libraries, like, transitioning away from synth modules where everything was synthesis into actual audio samples of live instruments so that it sounded much more real. That was the transition that was happening right as we were graduating. And so we always felt like when we were learning how to do mock-ups and things, we never felt that the sounds were of quality for a final product, because they just weren't at the time. So we didn't realize, when I first started hearing actual sample libraries, I was blown away because of how realistic it was. And then I think that was sort of the realization of, wow, there's going to be a lot of stuff in the box for final broadcast now. And we've done a ton of that, of course, now. But at the time, it was, when I was a kid, I never imagined that it would be that. I always thought everything would be live orchestra. We were fortunate in college, too, because a lot of our composition projects that we did, we would mock them up, but they were just, sounded like really bad synth mock-ups, but gave you the idea of what it was going to be. But most of the projects we got to work on, we got to record live, which was really cool, whether it was like a student film or whatever, and we would get players together and go into the studio and actually record it. A lot of people who consider themselves composers now and have yet to have that experience when they're getting their education, because they come from bands or whatever. And,
so that was non-orchestral training and non-orchestral background.
Or like a pop and rock
amazing
background.
Composers and
amazing storytellers, but don't quite have the orchestral knowledge, and then relying on arrangers and orchestrators to really make it work for an orchestra.
What did you have to do to get up to speed?
I guess it's just doing your best to keep up. We would just ask a lot of questions and talk to people who were working. One of the first people that we really met in the industry was Lee Sanders, who did a substantial amount of composing for The Amazing Race.
He was our teacher at UCLA Extension Film Scoring.
Yeah, and he's the one that sort of introduced us to Giga Studio and sample libraries and all of that. And so just continually asking him questions like, oh, what should I be looking at? What are the new things coming up? And just keeping an eye out for what's new and what's innovative and what's the best, exploring a lot of different libraries to find out what's the best for this and what's the best for this. And I think it's healthy not to just stick to one particular thing, but research a bunch of different libraries, find out the best for this case, and mix and match from all the different things.
And you kind of have to experimenting with that.
You kind of have to become obsessed with it in a way, and not give up, and always be interested and fascinated, so that you can learn as much as you can, because it's always changing. And there's, at any given time, there's always so much that you can do or that you should be doing. So it's like almost making it like a hobby or an obsession of just researching all you can, trial and error, experimenting as much as you can. When you get a library, get a new sample library or whatever, go through every patch and play with it and see is this something I could use? Is this useful for me? Would I ever use this? And keep track of it. A lot of people, I think they get sample libraries and they just find one patch and load it and just kind of stick to that and don't mix and match. It's very time consuming, but the time is well worth putting in to find what's useful.
Sounds like you found most of the libraries that you use from other people's recommendations.
To start with, absolutely. Well, yeah, most of the time, for sure. But it's interesting how when you'll get something based on a recommendation and you'll find that your strengths using it are completely different than the person who recommended. And so that's why it's valuable to explore and do your own research with it. But the recommendations, of course, can be your recommendations actually have been very helpful. Perfect example. There might be varying opinions about what works for how a certain person programs. I'm less of a keyboardist, than you are. So it might be, you might implement it in a different way. But asking a lot of questions, getting good recommendations, but then on top of that, exploring it yourself in depth is the best way to do it.
And now finally with YouTube, which we didn't have back when we were starting, now a new library comes out and someone will sit down, the creator or whatever, and he'll do a whole walkthrough of every patch, and you can decide for yourself right then from just watching it if it's something that's beneficial for you or helpful or even good at all. And so that's been helpful. But when you're starting out way back before you have that access, you just have to trust somebody's recommendation, try it, and And we've gotten libraries before that I used it like once and like, you know what? I spent like $1,000 on some things and like, it's just not the demos on the website.
We won't mention what libraries those are.
Because, you know, the demos sound amazing on the website. They spend so much time making their demos and you listen to it and it sounds amazing and then you get it and it's like, this isn't really usable.
Well, if you're willing, it might be important to list libraries that you don't use.
Well,
Dimension Brass?
yeah, that was one of
Vienna?
the ones, the Dimension Brass. I was very impressed with the demos, and then it was just too finicky and it's too specific of a thing to be, because the way it's like they're harmonizing with, I can't even remember all, but I used it a few times and went through all the patches and it didn't work for me.
And is it fair to say that some libraries that are giant, like the whole orchestra library, you'll buy it and then you'll be like, well, the strings are good, but the brass is terrible?
Yes, that's happened. I mean, I know one of the more recent ones was the whole Spitfire Symphonic Orchestra. Those demos are the most impressive demos I've ever heard in my life. I mean, if you were to show it to me, I would. If I had not known that it was a sample library demo, I would have thought, well, of course, this is recorded all at Air in London with all London musicians and everything, and it sounds absolutely real. But implementing it, trying to use it, it's like, I don't know how to make it sound as real. Sonically, it's beautiful. Everything is beautifully placed and stuff. I just don't know quite how to use it yet to make it sound like the demos sound. And I haven't had the chance really to explore every patch. But it's like you have the hope of opening it and it's just like, oh, it's going to be... And the other Spitfire stuff I use, a lot of Albion and some of the other things, like the pizzicato patches and the woodwind staccatos and things, you know, they're so easy to use and they just sound exactly like you want. So I was sort of expecting that, and I think the patches are just so much more involved that it's going to take a lot more than just like opening it and playing and it's perfect. So I just need to spend more time with it.
Because you're both orchestrators, orchestra players, and orchestrally trained composers, do you find it's more difficult to get solo instruments sounding great, like solo woodwinds, versus an ensemble patch of a battery?
I think it depends on the library. I've been as far as Vienna goes, we were talking about Dimension Brass, not necessarily working for us, but the original, just the simple special edition Vienna
instruments.
I still use those like solo flute 1 and 2, the oboe, but that's all I use for the entire library. I don't use any of the brass. I don't use anything else.
We used to. The legato horns was
Yeah, we used to use a lot of it,
time.
but as we got other libraries, I still like some of these new things are great libraries. Even like, you know, Berlin has some fantastic stuff, but sometimes I'll still just go back to that old Vienna Special Edition solo
flute, solo clarinet. It's fantastic.
Solo clarinet. I still use that 8-horn section. I still use the solo horn, the bass clarinet.
I still use the harp, just the basic harp notes and
Got an
celeste
amazing
even.
bass, the harp.
Yeah.
With the low notes of the harp. It's the best sounding low harp samples ever. And then you use what else?
Celeste, you know, I roll off the attack a little bit to give it more of that John Williams-y
But
sine
also,
wave kind of
Berlin has some really good. The solo winds are great. Like the flute has a nice expressive vibrato, more so than the Vienna. It just depends on what kind of phrasing and solo you're looking for.
Even if it's for yourself.